Because CBDCs, I think, it's pretty obvious the flaw in.
Big no. CBDCs, you don't have control of it. We don't want the government with sole control of our fiat currencies when it's privately held.
Yeah.
So blockchain and decentralized systems are for sure the future.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is going to be the gold standard. That's me, like, just being real, right? You just got to be real. Really sad to see how America is engaged overseas. It's been unhelpful for our own country to approach foreign affairs this way. And we're seeing it in real time. If you really think about the function of government, it's one giant transactional vehicle. So if you think about what blockchain is really, really good at.
I was hoping you were going to go here. I hear that you also own guns, that you also enjoy guns. I heard you were a pretty good shot.
I have an incredible shot. To answer your original question, is I think that I've been fighting this battle in a silo in the middle of California, only to realize that a lot of my partnerships were going to be outside of the Democratic Party. I realized I've actually been a lot more center than I thought. The health of a nation really is based on the health of the soil. And if you look at all empires of the past, they all began to disintegrate when their soil management was no longer something that provided abundance for the masses. The amount of life in the soil equates to the abundance of the nation. It's really, really important that we support small and medium-sized farmers in this country, that we support farmers who tend and steward life in the soil, and thus are tending and stewarding the life in us.
Conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it.
Our security is at stake.
All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Got a really fun and special episode today for you. I recently traveled to San Francisco to interview Nicole Shanahan live in person. And what you're about to watch, what you've seen clips from so far, is my interview with Nicole Shanahan. I want to be really clear that this was not a paid interview at all. There was no monetary incentives here. This is just an open and unscripted conversation with Nicole. I was really excited to talk to Nicole because she has a lot of really interesting expertise about some of the things that I think are most important to Americans right now. Things like the economy, monies, technology, things like public health and regenerative agriculture. And so I purposely took this time to ask Nicole about a lot of the things that she's most passionate about and most knowledgeable about, but is often not the forefront of political discussions because it's not what donors want to talk about and it's not what big money wants to support people talking about. So it's not what politicians are normally talking about. So I'm really excited to get more politicians incentivized to start talking about the real things that really matter here in America today. And I'm also want to make a quick point that the point of talking to politicians, the point of listening to politicians is not to convince anyone to vote for anyone in specific. And this interview is not about convincing you to vote for Bobby Kennedy and Nicole Shanahan, but rather to get us as a collective, as a people, talking about the things that actually matter instead of getting lost in the culture wars and the distractions derail politics into a treadmill of non-progress, of non-action. So don't think of this as anything other than a really interesting conversation with a really incredible woman who has a lot of knowledge and a lot of great ideas about what's wrong with this world and what we can do about it. I had a ton of fun making it, ton of fun meeting the whole team and everyone surrounding Nicole Shanahan. It was very cool, very kind. And so I hope that this discussion is as fun for you as it was for me. Without further ado, let's get into my interview with Nicole Shanahan. I don't want to keep on going where we were just talking though before the camera started rolling.
Sure.
Because you were kind of elucidating on, if I'm not mistaken, how you sort of came into Silicon Valley in a little microcosm of the legal like tech space and how that was not the same culture. Could you elaborate on that a little for me?
Yeah. So I am one of the first true legal AI technologists. And I was brought into Stanford to be a fellow on faculty and to continue my research in legal AI. My background prior to that was I worked in patents. I started as a patent paralegal, was really passionate about it. And then I worked at a large patent licensing firm. And the belief was, how do we make it so that more people can cross-license technology? Because, anytime you build a computer now, it's tens of thousands of patents. And so there's this need for the innovation economy to evolve how it transacts IP.
Yeah. And IP, I think, I've been chuckling to myself about this all day as I've been thinking about your history in IP. I think most people look at IP as being this like the most boring version of law. And you seem to have a real passion for it because I don't think you see it the way that everyone else does. Is there like, how do you see IP?
So I think of intellectual property and patents in particular
Yeah.
as representing the full corpus of human innovation and human potential.
Almost like all the little pieces is what you mean? Like,
All of the incremental pieces, because a single patent only covers a tiny advancement, which relies on a whole host of what we call prior art. And
yeah.
that can go back hundreds of years. And to me, it's always been a way to be able to touch every aspect of human evolution, was to look through the patent corpus and to watch it evolving. And I had this intuition and insight to create the first large language model on every single patent ever published.
And you did, right? And that
I
became
did.
the company that you built, correct?
Yeah, so that was Clear Access IP, and I was building it at Stanford's Codex Center. So Stanford's Codex Center is the first center of its kind that is a merger between the computer science department and the law school.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, you also somewhere early on in that project, you used this large language, or not large language, but this machine learning model, right? To make a database of all molecules ever discovered by humans. Is that true?
As represented in the patent corpus.
Uh-huh.
So we did a small molecule database. We were able to extract many things related to the healthcare system and to biosciences, and we extracted it into these separate databases.
So molecules being everything from like a drug to like a compound that's used in a pesticide to a compound that's used in facial products, right? Like basically the whole spectrum.
Well, that's the power of starting with the patent corpus, that each of these patents is chock full of information about how every industry is organized.
Yeah.
And so healthcare and life sciences, you're looking at different genes, discussion of how genes are expressed. You're looking at different compounds and formulas and molecules. And it was just it was an obvious database that we could create from it. And it was really exciting to see.
That's cool, because it's really apparent that you're looking at a lot of these things from a lens that most people would kind of look and just pass on. But I'm getting what you mean about how that gets right to the heart of like the human innovation cycle, or sort of the academy of ideas over time.
And that's also how I came to learn about women's reproductive health and how little work was being done in it.
Oh, because there was like an absence of IP involved. Interesting. Could you describe more about like what you mean or what the process was of figuring that out?
So my company was hired by a group to do a landscape analysis of all of the advancements happening in longevity medicine. And I was curious, looking at the results, whether or not there was a group working on women's reproductive longevity. And in fact, there's nothing.
Wow.
And then I had to really question myself. There was a ton of stuff in IVF, but it wasn't being talked at in the patent literature as extension of reproductive years. And in fact, there wasn't
Kind of a replacement of reproductive years in some ways, right?
it's an alternative to actually thinking about healthy fertility. It's, you know, it's there if you've given up on healthy fertility. And
Which
so
no shame to people that don't have that option, right? Like to
no
have healthy
shame at
fertility to them.
I think that it fills a role. I think that there are learnings that come from IVF. And, you know, certainly it's out there, it's available. I come from a background of really believing in medical freedom and access to whatever, you know, you want to do. But I think in the absence of investments in actual fertility, it can be, you know, taken maybe out of context or manipulated for commercial purposes beyond what it actually represents.
Yeah, I heard one of the podcasts you were recently on with Miss King. I'm forgetting the names. And you said something that totally changed my perspective on pro-life, where you reframed pro-life as not just pro not abortions, but rather pro-life as like pro-fertility, pro having the ability to
True women's empowerment. I mean, really thinking about maternal empowerment and what are the constituent parts of what does empower a woman to become a mother. A successful mother, a mother who feels pride in her ability to care for her child and to give her child a healthy life. And so I like to think about that holistically in the sense of, you know, it's really important that when we're talking about abortion, we don't lose sight of all of these maternal rights and freedoms that are so necessary, like the right to have a child if you want to have the child, because our community is designed to support that. And look, and if there is an unexpected pregnancy that is, you know, thoughtfully unwanted, then having the access to abortion or maternal care in those moments, but you have to remember, like, we have to make sure we are looking at the whole situation and not just expediting abortions. I speak personally, like, this is where I think it's really important that women speak for themselves in these moments. And you know, I know that the sooner a woman can get care, pregnancy care, the more likely she's able to make a good informed decision for herself. And so,
yeah, it was cool to have the experience of having not necessarily my mind changed, but in a lot, like my whole perspective opened or shifted by someone that had sort of a more informed take. But this is something that's on my mind a lot lately, is just in what I do is one thing I look for is people that are able to change their minds when they meet information, when they meet a different opinion that sways them of something. And I want to get back to patent IP and blockchain in a second, because I have a feeling we could detour into a million things. But I would be really curious to get your take as Kennedy's VP, and having gotten to know him so well now, is there any times that come to mind when you've watched Bobby change his mind on something?
Yeah. I mean, Bobby is one of these incredibly dynamic minds that is able to take in an enormous amount of information, write a book about it, and then to be able to triangulate information from different perspectives. And I think that's what makes him a great leader, and certainly a leader in this moment where we so desperately need that kind of executive leadership in our country that is able to take in these different perspectives, measure them, and then diagnose in that moment. So I've seen him do this with so many different issues. I've seen him do it from a place that is very well balanced intellectually and emotionally, because I think that sometimes there's a tendency to be a cold politician, and to, you know, really think more than feel. And it's important to have that in balance. And also, I've seen the inverse. I've seen politicians feel these very extreme emotions and not be able to think. So what I've been very impressed at in learning about how Bobby digests information is he's very much a consensus builder. He's very much a forward thinker. He is able to juggle warring opinions in a room. This is a non-traditional campaign team. We don't have a party. And we're drawing from the left, and we're drawing from the right, and we're drawing from the center, and we're drawing from way outside the box.
Yeah, just the people I've met so far today have been from every political persuasion and experience, and it's very cool.
It's really cool. And what I've never had this opportunity also to be in a room with so many different perspectives. I, come from California, a very traditionally progressive place. And I've always felt like I didn't have much in common with conservatives because of the way our political party here in California talks about Republicans. And so for me to be able to go out in the world and spend time, in open conversation with conservatives has been incredibly rewarding. And I think that those kinds of coalitions are being built right now all over the country. And that's the kind of movement in America that is going to unstick us from this very unfortunate spot that we're stuck in this moment. But I think the next 4 years are going to be years of change. They might feel a little bumpy at times, but I do think by 2028, we're going to be in a really good place in this country because of the momentum and what is being seeded right now.
I identify strongly with the being raised in a liberal state and having this opinion of conservatives that's sort of not founded from talking to them. And I'd be curious if you could just identify, like, what do you think is one piece of you or opinion of yours that has maybe shifted over the last year or two as you've sort of gone center, that you used to have a certain take on either conservative values or a certain one of your own opinions that has been sort of shifted by engaging more with the right?
Yeah, I realize I've actually been a lot more center than I thought. And if you look at my portfolio of work, when I went into criminal justice reform, and look, I looked at the DAs. I haven't looked at DAs in a long time because I don't think the DAs are where philanthropists should be doing their work. But even so, I looked for a police officer who could be a good DA. And George Gascon was a police officer. He was police chief. And then he became a DA. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. Let's heal the divide between the DA's office and the police department. And, he's very unliked right now and in LA. But he's also liked by some people. So he's kind of stuck in the middle, right? Which is what you would expect as from a former police officer who's become a DA. And then I think about my work in climate change, which is a term that has been co-opted by these energy companies largely. And now I can't say that, I'm participating in climate change. But even if you look at what I've done in the space, I determined, and this was like 7 years ago, that the only work I would do in climate change was regenerative agriculture, because it was the only thing that made financial sense. It was the only thing that actually made ecological sense. And it's the only thing that is in the best interest of humans.
Okay, we got a detour because I'm too excited about that part of it. We'll come back to the rest of it too. Because I didn't realize that you got so interested in regenerative agriculture that long ago. I kind of had assumed it maybe had to do with your journey of trying to figure out what was going on with Echo or something else more recent. So it's like way back.
Yeah, it was well before Echo was born.
What got you into it in the first place? Or like, how'd you come across the concept at all?
So I had decided to do work in climate and to figure out the best possible solution for managing the carbon cycle. And I looked at every single drawdown project, and there was only one category that fit all of that fit into my rubric of affordable, restores natural systems, restores aquifers, and good for humans
So
with no externalities.
yeah.
Um,
So you just did the research and rightly came to the conclusion of like, this is the obvious solution.
yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And my foundation put together an entire paper with the science on how we can pay off the entirety of our carbon debt in the United States if we just transitioned a portion of our 900 million acres of agricultural land in the United States.
Yeah.
And I had this paper and all of the supporting documents, and I actually took it to Chuck Schumer.
Uh-huh.
And I said, will you please make this a reality? And at the time, he was fundraising to secure the Senate majority. And I was like, okay, well, if you get the Senate majority and I help you get the Senate majority, regenerative agriculture is going to be like our path for climate issues.
Yeah.
And he kind of said, of course, yeah, regenerative, great, okay. And and I've made mistakes. I'll admit the carbon credit markets that I was initially very excited about, and I worked on the Growing Climate Solutions Act and had a chance to meet with Debbie Stabenow, senator from Michigan, to talk about it. I thought that, if we could create financial markets for farmers, for carbon drawdown, that would be the financial structure, the winning financial incentive structure. And then I realized that it just wasn't.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
Do you think because it's an inadequate system or because it's been corrupted and co-opted or maybe a bit of both?
I think it's been corrupted and co-opted, but largely by these insetting and offsetting schemes that end up just cycling back into, these corporations.
Which kind of feels like a theme in the climate change, like the debate that's sort of allowed to be front and center in the stage, while regenerative agriculture is kind of pushed to the side. Do you agree on that?
It gets kicked to the side all the time as a unserious method for carbon capture. And it couldn't be further from the scientific reality. And in fact, the externalities that we're seeing from other climate change and climate, mitigation efforts are so dire and so dystopian and thought financially very expensive, involving chemical inputs that have massive risks to human and biological health. So I think in that sense, to answer your original question, is I think that I've been fighting this battle in a silo in the middle of California, only to realize that a lot of my partnerships were going to be outside of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, we're actually going to be maybe farmers and people that are already like conservationists. Because that's the thing that I love about regenerative agriculture, and that the movies that we'll get to in a second. Because when I first heard about the actual concept of regenerative agriculture through the movies that you helped to fund and get in front of my face, and those two movies, Kiss the Ground and Common Ground, make it so clear that all you need to do is tell people about it. And Republicans and Democrats all agree. It's like, oh, that's so obvious.
It's so obvious once you see it. I mean, meeting Rebecca and Josh Tickell, the filmmakers, was really fantastic, because I saw an early version of Kiss the Ground and no one was reading my white paper. I was like, this is what I ought to be helping get out there. And it was obvious to me. I mean, talk about obvious, but it was very obvious to me that working with the Kiss the Ground team and the Common Ground team was definitely the method of getting the message out.
I was talking with Jacob over lunch about it, and he mentioned something along the lines of, you kind of jumped in and helped fund a way to get it, especially I think the second one, because Common Ground, the second one, was they tried to make them cut certain parts of it and they wouldn't distribute it otherwise. And it sounded like you actually kind of jumped in, not to help get it made, but to help get it distributed. Is that true?
It's really interesting what they were up against in Common Ground, because they did a whole investigative section of the film dedicated to debunking fake meat as being an environmentally friendly solution or a health friendly solution. And there's been a lot of pushback because if you look at how much money has gone into fake meats, it's billions of dollars at this point of investment across all of the efforts. And if you look at the, the way that they're taking out and trying to limit cattle, like live cattle, as a meat source, and then the health differences between eating grass-fed cattle versus lab-grown meat, or fake meats that are plant-based and full of ingredients humans have historically never eaten. So they had a section in the film dedicated to showing that, and all of the chemical inputs and all of the big vat processing that goes into it. It really offended some of the distribution platforms. I think I don't know all of the stories, but from what I understand is the best method for them to get the message out as they wanted to get out was to go theater to theater across the United States and self-release.
Yeah, and that's where I got involved, and it was really cool to be a part of that grassroots sort of way of getting that information to people. So I'm thank you for helping make that happen, because more people, you people, need to learn about regenerative agriculture. But we could spend all day talking about regenerative agriculture, and I want to return back because you are maybe the first person ever to be potentially in the Oval Office with direct expertise in AI and in blockchain.
Probably.
Yeah, right. And I think not enough people are having the conversation about how vital that is going to be to the rest of our lives. And maybe part of that's out of ignorance, maybe part of that's out of inflammatory media cycles. But you might have already answered this earlier. Did AI or did blockchain come into your professional or intellectual life first?
They were around the same time, honestly. I was at Stanford, and part of various blockchain related legal circles. There's also the patents of blockchain, and which I was involved in, and thinking about how to, balance open source IP versus closed sourced IP for the blockchain. And so, 2015, this was really taking off. I hosted a conference that Vitalik Buterin was on a beam. Do you remember the beam machines?
No.
Snowden was on one once. He very famously, if you remember, there are these robots with a screen.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see just the head, and the robot can move around, controlled by the person on the screen.
So he can come in from Russia and join the conference?
Yeah. Snowden didn't join the conference. Sorry, I was referencing he was, I think, actually at a, maybe it was even a Google
another
conference
event or something.
But Vitalik did. Before he launched Ethereum officially, he was zooming around one of my conferences. And I've done research. I've been in the rooms trying to figure out the law of blockchain, and had the privilege actually in 2015 of meeting Elizabeth Stark when she was starting Lightning Labs. And funny story, but Jacob, my partner, when we met, I found out he was working for her. And my response was, "Oh, okay. If you can handle her, you can." Like, no, I was like, it was like, she like cleared him for me, right? Because I was like, oh, if he passed her, test of quality, then
He's like such a chill dude. Just having gotten to meet him for about an hour, like I totally see how he seems to have a really grounded take in crypto and in like in changing the world, but also in sort of thinking bigger and being connected to like the human side of the world too.
Yeah. And I think that's, and when we talk about Bitcoin, it's very different than the rest of crypto. Like, Bitcoin is truly a transformative technology that represents the future of decentralized currencies. It's, transnational. It's really impressive how it's been able to maintain itself and how it's held all of the other groups trying to create other things like it to a standard. And if you can't meet the Bitcoin standard, you're likely not going to exist for very long.
Maybe for one cycle.
Maybe for one news cycle or two, but it's when that big crypto bubble started happening, I wasn't part of that and knew immediately that it was very much a bubble. But I've never stopped following blockchain technology as really being something that will survive. So blockchain and decentralized systems are for sure the future.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is going to be the gold standard of crypto. And I'm an early buyer of Ethereum. So that's me, like, just being real, right? You just got to be real.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Well, in my case, it was kind of like, but I was, so I was in these circles as a lawyer, looking at, all of the legal issues surrounding them, watching what Elizabeth Stark has pulled off with stable coins just last week. And you have to understand, when she first started talking about doing this 10 years ago, it seemed impossible.
Yeah.
It really didn't seem likely to use the Bitcoin protocol for anything other than Bitcoin.
Well, Bitcoiners were also probably quite resistant to it, I would imagine, at first. Or am I wrong on that?
It was irrelevant if they're resistant to it, because it would take a level of coordination across the core developers that didn't exist by purpose, intentionally. It was intentionally designed to be truly decentralized.
Yep.
And so to be able to figure out how to tie in to that protocol with other currencies, like, and fiat currencies. I mean, this is mind-blowing. This is like a huge deal. And
most of the world doesn't even know the first thing about it, right?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, they ought to.
They ought to.
Because it's transformative. It's probably, like, I don't think people understand how hard it is to do what she's done and pulled off. I'm like still just, I mean, I'm thrilled for her, and I'm thrilled that this is happening, but I will tell you, like, if I were to put my bet on anyone being able to pull this off, it would have been like very low odds.
I don't want to get off this too fast before I rewind a little bit to the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, and how you're saying that Bitcoin is the future of currency. And I want to give you a chance to address the people that are skeptical of Bitcoin as the future of currency, where a lot of people are worried about having currency be
CBDC.
Well, not just CBDCs, but because CBDCs, I think, it's pretty obvious the flaw in having, a big no, and having it all centralized behind closed doors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a new version of fiat, worthless paper money. But what would you...
Fiat, you have control of it, presumably, because you can, have it in paper, you can have it in a bank account, you can have it held in other assets, and you have,
But a CBDC as a whole.
CBDC is, you don't have control of it.
And not only do you not have control of it, but they have ultimate control over it in ways they have not even yet told you they will program.
And I always try not to use the word they too much, but the government.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want the government with sole control of our fiat currencies when it's privately held.
Yeah.
And so that private principle, factor that of oversight and control and the ultimate signatory, like, that needs to be preserved.
The word private goes right to what I want to get your take on, which is sort of the next level of nuance. Is people have concern and I maybe have a little of Bitcoin is like so public. It's a public ledger.
Mhm.
And so I assume, I mean, there will always be assets like gold. There might always be assets like cash. Do you think it's an issue if suddenly all monetary systems are publicly ledgered and there's no more like private cash-based systems? Do you think there needs to be a balance in the future of how we transact?
100% there needs to be a balance, and I think stable coins give us that. I don't think we should all ditch our fiat currencies and be Bitcoin only. I mean, I'm not giving anybody financial advice. I'm just talking from a governance standpoint. I do think as long as there are countries, it's important to have fiat currencies that can be truly privately held.
Yeah.
And I believe that Bitcoin's interesting when you think about it as a transactional tool. My background at Stanford, when I was, thinking about writing a breakthrough theory, was on transaction cost theory, a next generation of it past what Ronald Coase had established in Coase's theorem.
So there's CBDCs are the ultimate privatized money. Bitcoin and public blockchains take it to sort of the public ledger. And the next step is actually Bobby has talked about putting the federal budget on the blockchain. And I'd love to get your take not only on if the federal budget could and how you would get it on a blockchain, but maybe things like stocks on the stock market. Like, doesn't it make sense that public assets are like the ultimate blockchainable type of assets? These things that we're publicly trading, these things that are supposed to be a public good that we want the public to have full transparency of. Does that?
So there's a few questions there. So let's first talk about the the federal budget.
Yeah.
So the federal budget is published. It is publicly accessible. It's a little hard to work with and understand exactly what everything means and what it goes through. But I'd like to even rewind. Like, what is government? If you really think about the function of government, it's one giant transactional vehicle, right? There's money that comes in. And there's money that goes out, and there's policies governing how the money goes out. That's all government is. That's why when we talk about all these culture wars, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like we have other branches of government to think about that. But we have the judiciary to think about it, but we also have just the Constitution, which we 100% have to preserve. We can talk about that separately, but in regards to the function, like, what does government do? It really is just a administrative entity, a transactional entity that takes money in and puts money out. So if you think about what blockchain is really, really good at,
I was hoping you were going to go here,
is like moving money around with very, very low transactional overhead. And that's how I came to know blockchain, was through smart contracts and AI, to the issue of AI. So when you combine blockchain with AI, you get an incredible, incredible economies of just brilliant functioning, like just clean, incredibly lean, transparent, fast, low overhead transactions
that do exactly what you program them to do, right?
That yes, you can program the rules, the policies into them, the clearing house requirements. It is, an incredibly elegant solution to a lot of the problems we face today, is that we have these old legacy systems running our government. And they're very expensive and they're very slow and bureaucratic and they drive people nuts. Like, government procurement is just so painful. I was just at a project in Oakland, housing for the formerly incarcerated. And the woman running it, this 81-year-old woman, has to fill out so many forms to just access these grants from the government. And by the time they actually get to her, it's a fraction of what the overall budget is, because it's been cut away by all of these bureaucratic channels that shouldn't exist.
I mean, this kind of sounds like one of those values that could be maybe classically conservative, but it's kind of a middle ground value when you think about it, right? It's like, why is the government so big if so much of it is just wasted transactions when we
Wasted
could do it so
transaction
much
costs.
better? Exactly.
Mhm.
Just extra burn, so to speak.
Mhm.
And this kind of gets to one of the other things that you have done so much with your life is actually combining AI with law, right?
Mhm.
Is, if I'm not mistaken, a huge portion of your life has been dedicated to sort of making, maybe you could explain it better than me, making the law accessible to regular people through the use of AI. Am I getting this right, more or less?
Yeah, so one of Codex's big missions, the center that I am affiliated with at Stanford, is to use technology to increase access to justice. And part of our community were the founders of LegalZoom.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about what LegalZoom accomplished, it was a web version of government documents, and you would just submit it through it would fillable form, and you would submit it over the internet to a group of lawyers, and they would go and file it for you. And this was transformative. It reduced the cost of creating LLCs and corporations and, doing a whole number of other legal tasks. So taking it a step further, we've had people come out of our center that have done incredible things with AI and the law, reducing the cost of these tasks that you would be paying billable hours to a lawyer, sometimes, $300 an hour to have a, trusted estates attorney draw up a will for you. And now you could do, for $25.
Yeah. So you're talking a lot right now about sort of like the current state of how AI is helping people access legal representation for much, much less money. Do you think that we're within spitting range of a world where you actually can just have an AI lawyer that basically fulfills the entire role of a lawyer? Do you think that that's...
Yeah.
Yeah. How close do you think that is?
Of this year's conference, the Future Law Conference, was, if we do have lawyers completing, or AI completing legal tasks, who should that AI be modeled off of? And so if you actually, so there's this really great project completed at DLA Piper where they looked at a number of attorneys all trying to complete the same task, and they all came back with different answers.
Yeah.
So then the question is, well, were some of the answers were good for different reasons, and the lack of consistency in how lawyers complete these tasks is actually what makes the practice of law good.
Yeah.
And what evolves the practice of law, and what gives, some lawyers a different advantage over other lawyers. And that what we've learned is that the practice of law is actually very human.
Yeah.
And there's as many flavors of lawyers as you can imagine. And of course, there's one body of law, but there's different ways to talk about that body of law.
Yeah.
And some tend to be better than others. And every time you change the facts, you're going to get a completely different output from that lawyer. So then the question becomes do we train the legal AI across an average of these lawyers, or do we personalize it per lawyer?
Yeah.
So I think that and this is why I'm not so afraid of AI taking jobs. I mean, they'll definitely lean out jobs quite a bit, but I still think that for those things that require human counseling, like the practice of law or the practice of medicine, there will be no AI replacement in the sense of, there's probably going to be a range, right? You'll probably have some legal AIs that will get you to certain tasks, but if you want to up it with like an incredible corporate attorney, you're probably still going to want a human for that.
And I could be wrong, but you would know much better than myself, but I would imagine that the process of, as AI representation in legal matters becomes more and more accessible, that fundamentally levels the playing field for regular people, and where it has traditionally been skewed to corporations that can sue people out of existence, that can, like, I've got a friend that is used to own a franchise that they came after her, so to speak.
Yeah.
Am I correct in that assumption that AI lawyers sort of fundamentally level the playing field for regular people, or is there
And
more nuance to
ideally,
it?
yes. We're not there yet,
Yeah,
but in a world in which an AI can do like pro se representation, it's definitely an opportunity for people to self-represent
yeah,
who have never been able to self-represent.
yeah.
So in that sense, it is an incredibly positive development.
And just a second ago, we were kind of talking about, like, how do you program ethics into AI? And we were more talking about how do you program different interpretations. But you've
Yeah.
talked a lot about sort of the ethics question in AI and how you program that. And my understanding is we're still not there. We still don't understand how to do it.
Human alignment, that's one way of looking at it, is
Yeah.
the human alignment of AI has not gotten the attention it ought to. The leadership in the space is coming from a lot of people I know. John Ney is one of them, who wrote the first paper on showing where AI is today and like where human alignment is.
Yeah.
When we think about, completion of these very important things that humans do and where AI is, it's not aligned. There's a massive gap between AI and human alignment. So that's the gap that we need to be closing right now. And it's challenging because, human to human alignment isn't really there either.
That's a good point.
As well. So that being said, there's tons of activity and energy going on trying to understand how to get there. Regulation is, I think, moving away for, there's a lot of fear-based regulation happening.
Yeah.
For instance, there's all these laws coming out of Brussels trying to figure out how to regulate LLMs. In Asia, there's a group trying to figure out how to regulate LLMs. I heard one crazy idea that like they were going to try to register each LLM
As an entity?
as an entity to
Yeah.
qualify it for operation. I'm not sure that's going to work very well.
Yeah. So are you just seeing this happen and kind of thinking, like, does it feel like it's being done by people that don't understand what they're trying to regulate? Or is there more nuance to what's going on there?
I definitely think that the attempted regulation is a welcome exercise. I don't think they're getting it right now, and I don't think that I think that there's going to be some balance of like how we think about open source AI versus closed source AI. If you think about corporate incentives on keeping certain AIs closed sourced indefinitely so that they have this intrinsic trade value. But then you look at what's going on in the open source world, and people are like, well, OpenAI can write poems. Like, that's kind of a party trick.
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's not going to be as sophisticated as what you're seeing in the closed source world.
Yeah. Speaking of open source AIs and corporate incentives, what's your take on what happened at OpenAI over the last year or two? Like the company OpenAI, not the concept.
Yeah.
Does it concern you? Is it actually just seem like business as usual, and it's a little more, it's getting spun by kind of conspiracy theorists? Like,
I don't know. I don't have an insider view into what's going on at OpenAI. I can only tell you what I've seen, which is the same thing you've seen. Is that there's, disagreement in the direction of the company and how to think about human alignment as a protocol within these developer groups. OpenAI is impressive. I don't want to say that it's just a party trick. It is very impressive what they've accomplished with their large language models. They've really understood training incredibly well. I mean, GPT-4 was so much better than GPT 3.5, dramatically. Dramatically. They had just really honed in on their training data, and it showed. It showed in their results. I do worry that, there's, I don't think worry is the right word. I do think that these groups being disbanded that are really designed to be there for human alignment exploration, is telling. I think it's telling of where we are right now.
It's well said.
Mm-hmm.
This, you just kind of took my brain somewhere I wasn't expecting, in that as AI becomes more than just a party trick, more and more, I'm especially thinking about like AI video and deep fakes and how that's already
That's
changing the
come
landscape.
a long way.
Yeah. Do you have any perspective on, this is more of just like a personal take, I think, on what we need to do to sort of like keep, as a mother, like to keep your daughter safe growing up from just the various ways that AI video is going to change the world, AI, just all the things about AI that are going to affect how we try to live our lives as normal humans, and that can be taken advantage of in the future. How do you regulate that? How do you address that?
So here in the United States, we're actually better situated to deal with the unknowns of AI better than any other country. And that's because of our Constitution,
Mm.
and it's because of our judiciary. So the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is a really good example. It was designed initially for wire fraud, and has evolved to be able to address many, many issues of fraud over the internet. First Amendment. I just had a great conversation this morning where we were talking about how a lot of AI is being used to censor people on the web.
Yeah.
And you know what?
I've met that one.
Thank God we have the First Amendment. And there's going to be case after case challenging these issues around all of these agencies, government agencies, and their partnerships with these technology platforms and censoring speech, because we have the First Amendment, right? So, Fourth Amendment, no illegal search and seizure. That is going to protect us from an AI that's going through all of our stuff illegally. And so when I'm actually optimistic that if we put our effort in this moment into protecting all of our bodies of law that protect individual liberty, we're going to have the tools we need to combat issues that AI will present. And even down to deep fakes. And, these are IP. We have great IP and copyright laws. There's that new Scarlett Johansson voice issue that just came up. I mean, that is going to make for a wonderful case law.
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't quite connected that to IP yet.
Yeah.
Real quick, while we're on the topic of rights, I hear that you also own guns, that you also enjoy guns.
I don't own any, actually, but
I heard you were a pretty good shot.
I have an incredible shot.
Huh.
Yeah, the Second Amendment is, I think that, again, the Second Amendment is really important to preserve. And if the issue is gun safety and mass shootings, which is a very, very real issue, we need to get to the root of the issue. Taking away liberties while, obfuscating the issue around mental health is not going to lead us to a better tomorrow. What we have to do is understand specifically what is going on in each and every one of these mass shootings and get to the root of the cause. And maybe that makes me less liberal, but I actually think it makes me quite actually progressive in my thinking that, we can't strip people of their liberties. And ever.
Yep.
And yes, we have massive issues in this country around gun safety. But we actually have bigger issues around mental health.
No, I couldn't agree more. You will not find me arguing against you on that. But I don't mean to turn us all towards the 2A. I heard that earlier today and I was like, no way. Because what I want to do is quickly take the AI ethics one more step. Because I was recently listening to, I think it was Eric Prince, the guy that founded Blackwater back in Iraq, talk to Tucker Carlson, and they were talking about drones a lot.
Yep.
And I'm curious if you have any insight or just like personal takes on how do you regulate the use of AI in policing and in military and in sort of that more like futuristic dystopian way that we all kind of know is already on our doorstep, but no one in the political space is talking about how you apply law to that.
So police body cam data, how that's managed, how we collect it, how we monitor it, that was kind of our first test. There's not AI there, but there is a lot of data.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. So we have a whole system of managing that data, and it's a fairly good system. It's something that has shown us the power of data as it relates to policing activity. And there's going to be, if you look at how much energy went into body worn cams on police officers, it's going to be probably 10 times that amount when we start talking about using AI around policing. And there have actually already been deployed AI tools to retroactively look at policing activity. So that's already there.
Interesting.
They're not, most of them are not, it's like private-public partnerships.
Yeah.
So they're not like strictly government AI tools, but they're usually in partnership with a university, or it's been in partnership with foundations.
Yeah, what you're talking about here is like analyzing data about past policing activities as opposed to like policing citizens with AI so far.
Yeah, and there's been tools. The Arnold Foundation released a tool to DA's offices to look at case by case police reports to determine, a course of action or how the DA should be looking at the case. There's also been a tool deployed for blind charging, which automatically redacts any identifying information about the individual.
Interesting. I'm just kind of struck by how in just this conversation, but it seems like in your expertise in general, you sort of are like one foot in each court of like the human side of health and wellness and restoring the planet, and the the technological side of like innovation and the cutting edge. Do you feel like you live in two worlds sometimes? Do you feel like, or is it all unified for you?
I think I'm living very much in the moment of today. I think that we are humans, and understanding our human engineering is very important, and not allowing outside influences that are taking commercial interests in my decisions for my own health I think is very important in this moment. I think we've been sucked into these culture wars. We've been and even healthcare has been part of now these cultural differences, which is unfortunate because there is really a ground reality that is, in my mind, so common sense and so obvious that for us to flourish as humans and as a civilization, we need to really be thinking about our basic needs like clean water, how that water impacts us, and the science of water. We need to be thinking about food and the science of food, not the science of creating fake food, but the science of the food humans have been eating for generations. And to me, that's just very common sense. And it is, we are starting to see, hard evidence that moving humans away from a natural environment is totally destructive towards metabolic health. So I don't see that world any different than I see the world of technology, in the sense that we should be thinking about technology from a very common sense perspective. And once we do that, we can take all of the unnecessary noise away. And I'll compare it to the crypto bubble, right? There was, I don't know if people are going to love me saying this, but, Bitcoin makes a lot of sense. Blockchain makes a lot of sense. AI, you can even say it makes a lot of sense. It's just smarter software. But when you start filling it in with all of this unnecessary noise that isn't based on common sense and is based on these kind of smoke and mirrors exercises, or is based around ego of what I can accomplish versus what you can accomplish, right? Or my company raised more than your company. Like, that is all noise.
Yeah.
And it's never a good thing. Just like when we talk about health and and we're like saying, well, we don't know the causes of that, but take this instead, right? And these maximalist views on healthcare, we start to lose focus of the basics. So my mindset as I approach all of these issues that are big issues is, what is the most common sense truth that I know to work for the majority of people, but in a way that is defined by these long-term objectives of, well, health and wellness, and how do we preserve these God-given gifts, and then we start getting spiritual once you go there. But
It's another critical part of the human experience.
it's
in all of
huge.
spirituality's forms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I'm kind of hearing is that you're using the phrasing common sense, but it sounds like I could probably draw an analogy to just the human take on it all. It's like, we don't need to complexify the finite. Like, there's a common sense, a regular human way to look at that, and a regular human way to look at that, and what brings us all together, right? Because I'm coming back to what we were talking about, I think, before we started actually rolling, was how in meeting you and meeting Jacob and meeting your team, it's just you all feel very human. And we were kind of joking about how you're now thrust into this world that's going to try to make you be, do you remember how you put it?
Cynical, and kind of focused. In politics, they try to they character assassinate you. And the instinct is to resort to responding with a character assassination or defending your character assassination, and they pull you into this. And when you're not, we're taking the stance that we just won't be pulled into that there are much bigger issues that we should be focusing on right now. And that this is a needless waste of resources and time and energy. We have some really major things we have to overcome, like the deficit, like the fact that we have really created a geopolitical mess. And by we, it wasn't me, but it was these other people. But we're trying to come in and bring some reason and logic to it again. And really be able to understand, like, it's been really sad to see how America is engaged overseas. It's very much a America versus everyone else who is beneath us kind of stance on things. And it's been unhelpful. It's been unhelpful for our own country to approach foreign affairs this way. And we're seeing it in real time. And but we have to remember we're also the most innovative place on the planet, and that we have the Constitution. We are so lucky we have the Constitution. It is the thing we will always return to. And to see Congress kind of cannibalizing the Constitution has been one of the most painful things for me to see. And just this one session alone,
Yeah.
it's been shocking.
I think it's been eye-opening to a lot of America. I think it's eye-opening to have all of that happening right now, and to have your guys' campaign here in the middle. And I don't think it's just you. I think there's a lot of voices in American politics right now, and in journalism, that people are finding center again because of all of that. Do you think it's a natural pendulum swing? Do you think that it's like, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think we will naturally swing back from like the sort of totalitarian inclinations of too much government back to like, or do you think that we only get there if we fight? Do you think it's a human nature? Do you think it's a human push back to the middle?
I think that what our campaign represents is the efficacy and the power of the middle. You know, they say find your center. America is finding its center right now, and that is where it will find its strength again.
I was going to go into a whole other rabbit hole, but in being a vice president, I would imagine that there's probably often a lot of frustration, all the things you can't accomplish, at least in the first term, and all the things that you have to like. It's obviously politics, no matter your position, is a lot of compromise. But often vice presidents sort of like champion a task or champion like one campaign. If you are vice president for 4 or 8 years and you could only have like really aced one of your campaigns, like one of your things, what would be the project that you would finish your 4 or 8 years, look back on and say, I totally nailed that and that was my legacy? What would that one be for you?
Well, I'm going to assume in this scenario that Bobby has been successful in unraveling corporate capture of our agencies.
Because I'm sure that would probably be his answer.
And of course, I will help him fill these cabinet positions and these agency positions with people who, you know, actually like understand the foundations of metabolic health at the FDA, or who are farmers and understand soil science at the USDA. So assuming that all happens, I would be so happy to spend all of my time in farming and our food supply chain and getting toxins out of it.
And I think I know the answer, but I'd love to just give you the chance to tell me, why is that one so important to you?
You know, the health of a nation really is based on the health of the soil. And if you look at all empires of the past, they all began to disintegrate when their soil management was no longer something that provided abundance for the masses.
Yeah.
And we need a country that understands that the amount of life in the soil equates to the abundance of the nation. And that really is, if you just look simply at a nutritional index, like you can see it there. If you look at how we think about trade and subsidies and, you know, our role at the WTO, it always comes back to what we're growing here. It's really, really important that we support small and medium-sized farmers in this country, that we support farmers who tend and steward life in the soil, and thus are tending and stewarding the life in us.
Yeah. I can't think of a better place to end. Thank you so much for taking the time, Nicole.
That was really fun.
Conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left. This is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it.
Our security is at stake.